we all read biographies, autobiographies of different people, and one of the thing if we take away, what will be the takeaway of autobiography is typically the kind of experiences, the memories, and the learnings which people had in their life. Now, if that is what who they become at the end of their life, so in a way, it is the memories which they have experienced throughout the life is what makes them. Now, if that is the case, then if we put what we can see in the future in the hindsight in today's world and see it in our foresight, then we can clearly see the possibility of making who we are is within ourselves by creating the memories, the experiences we want to create for ourselves. So that is something which I'd like to discuss in today's topic, Shanti. So if you look at it in a way, and I don't want to use the word design in a more literary context, but more like design in how to make a meaningful life. And if we look at it in that way, I think we have the opportunity always to design our life. Many times after the time is past, people regret, and that can happen. But I think rather than regretting, looking at what is available for us in the immediate future and creating memories is something which we can discuss today.
Absolutely. And when you were mentioning this, I was just thinking as if those memories are like pages in a book. If life is a biography. And we go through a lot of things through our lives. But if you see, the memories are limited. They are not all of the things that we experience. They are the enhanced or exaggerated experience that stays with us. The experience not necessarily which was something which, was big always, but it created a lasting impact or a profound impact on our experience. It could be a small thing that you were extremely hungry while you were traversing through a certain area or region, and you were not finding anything that you were familiar with, you were not comfortable with, and then suddenly you take a turn and there was a little shop which provided you something which you are familiar and comfortable with, made you homely, and it stays with you. So it is a small thing if you see that it was just sufficing your hunger, but the journey towards that is what created the memory. So often the other thing is, memory is not the event that has happened, but the precursor to that event is what defines that event, and that stays with us. So again, life is a series of events we assume, but it is actually a collection of the precursor journeys towards those events. So we often forget building up of the context. And if you read a biography, autobiography, a journal, or even for that matter, a novel, which is descriptive, it is often the creation of the setup which creates the impact of the setup. And I'm just kind of becoming present to that through, as you were mentioning or as you were introducing the topic, I was also thinking about the memories that have been created in my head. And I was visiting different places, and one place was where I was hungry, and that's how that example also came. But yeah.
Now, I also like that point of yours when you say that it is the precursor of the event or the making of that event, which also adds a lot to that memory rather than the event itself. Event itself may be like a flag put on a mountain, but what is the precursor is the whole journey to reach that top of the mountain. So I was looking this Netflix documentary called Romantics. It is based on Yash Chopra's whole life story kind of. But the interesting point there are some interesting movies like Chandni, for example, or DDLJ, for example. So these are very landmark movies in Bollywood, you can say. And when we look at the movie itself is an event, which is very famous or it has done a lot of earning and whatever it is. So that's the part of it. But the interesting part in this documentary is the making which has gone in it. So how they interact with each other, what was the thought process while coming up with this storyline, all those things, or the small things which they do on the sets, etc. So I think that as a metaphor, if we see in our life also, rather than only waiting for that event to happen which we want to celebrate or talk about, it is also important to look at the hard work, the struggle, the suffering associated with it, because these events give meaning to that suffering. And a meaningful and happy life is not something which is absence of suffering. It is a presence of suffering in a meaningful way.
Absolutely. And with that in mind, we have to also understand the precursor. So, with, let's say, putting up a flag on Mount Everest is the event, then the precursor happens at 3 levels. One is where from the base camp you start the journey. So, the entire journey, the turmoil, the difficulties that you face towards climbing it, and then you make it eventually. Makes it eventful. If it was straightforward, if you are taken up by a helicopter and dropped at the top of the peak, and then you put the flag and come down, it perhaps may not be like a lasting event that you would be able to narrate so vividly. So that is the first layer of precursor. The second layer of precursor is the preparation that you make towards that. So before climbing Mount Everest, you climbed smaller peaks and you started preparing for it. You have started controlling your diet, preparing in terms of your exercises and getting acclimatized to the altitudes and everything. So that preparation is the second layer of it. The third layer is where the germination of the thought arises. And we reinforce that thought that I have to climb up the Everest with many other sort of stories and events that happened around it. And that could be like as far as your childhood, where you think that for the first time that this is possible, this is doable. And then you start working towards it and you start breaking barriers from that. That actually makes you resilient. That gives you the mental strength, the mental ability. The second is preparation layer actually builds you physically. And the third is where your grit is tested. Often we think that the grit is what being tested is both mental, physical, but it's something else. It's your identity which is being questioned when you're going through that process. Because if you're identifying yourself with pain, you will stop. But if you're identifying yourself with your purpose, you will be driven. But before getting to that, I think building the mental story, mental narrative, we often forget. The journey starts much before even you board the train.
And also, I think I would like to separate it from the actual reaching on the top of the mountain also, because Edmund Hillary and Sherpa Tenzing, we know their names because they were on the top. There were hundreds and thousands of people who, in the attempt of reaching Mount Everest, might have lost their lives. That doesn't make their life less meaningful. It is equally meaningful because they also were on that journey with the same kind of purpose as you rightly said. And they were focusing on the purpose. Of course, there are various other factors which are beyond control, weather, for example, or health issues at that point in time. There can be different infections. Various things can happen which are beyond one's control. But that doesn't make their effort less meaningful. I would like to bring that also, because many a times we only celebrate the one which we can see on the top of the mountain. But journeys done by other people, and this is just a metaphor we are using, Mount Everest, but in our life also, there are different people. Like, for example, we talk about startups these days, especially in Bangalore and some of the big cities. There is a lot of buzz about the startups and the success of startups. And some are successful and their names are taken, like Amazon, for example, started in a small garage or wherever, and then they're where they are today. But that doesn't take away the contributions, suffering, and the things which are done by people who are not successful as much as an Amazon or a Google of the world.
That's right. And as we speak, I was able to recollect at least 2 examples from 2 different professions. One is an interview of Amitabh Bachchan. The other is PTM's head. What's his name? Shekhar.
Vijay Shekhar.
Vijay Shekhar Sharma. Is that so? Yeah.
Vijay Shekhar.
Yeah. So both of them, in a way, paraphrasing them, what they said is that they did not credited their success. If success is to be measured by what their achievements are, then they did not credit their success for the extra abilities that they had. They credited it because of the alignment of certain other activities, or let's not be esoteric and say alignment of stars, but let's say the alignment of different contexts, different people who are working with them together, and creation of those favorable conditions leading to their success. Their ability or the special qualities that they kind of possess is not something which is unique. Many of them have, but they were favorable. They were at the right time, at the right place. And that allowed them to kind of gain that kind of exponential fame. And if we see through different famous personalities, interviews who have really achieved something, if achievement is to be measured in terms of final outcome, then most of them, they will never credit their success through, just their abilities. That would be pure arrogance.
Yeah, absolutely. And now, looping back to where we started with the autobiography part, I think consistently thus it is important to have that end in mind. I think it is one of the habits which is also mentioned by Stephen Covey in his book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Second habit, if I'm not wrong, he talks about having an end in mind. Now, this is a very powerful way to connect with that what memories we want to create. Because if you have that end in mind, you retrospectively keep thinking at things. Otherwise, many a times we just want to say things which are interesting or which are appreciated by everyone, or it is a trend in the market. So we say, like, for example, if someone asks me what are some of the top priorities for me, I may make sure to ensure that I put family in that, because everyone talks about family, because everyone wants to keep family, because if I don't say family, people may make some meaning or some other interpretations out of it. But then, if I am looking myself from keeping my end in mind, do I still see, maybe at the age of 80, maybe at the age of 90, whatever is the age I want to see, from there when I see, do I really value these values which I want to mention now? And that is a very powerful way which will kind of detach you from the trends. Because being an entrepreneur can also be my one of the, you can say, value for now. But I know that it is a temporary thing. At the end of the life, I would be happy not to be an entrepreneur also. It is okay for me.
Absolutely.
But I may not like to compromise my time spent or my meaningful availability of myself with my family. So these are the things which can help a person to also invest in the right memories. Because when we are talking about creating memories, some of the access for creating memories comes from money, time, energy. Where we spend our money, where we spend our time, and where we want to spend our energy. And I think that this clarity definitely helps one in appropriately utilizing these key resources in our life. In the absence of which, I may buy a fancy car maybe, but if that is not something which is coming intrinsically to me and not giving me that joy, then I'm just trying to make sure that I'm running with the trend.
And when I think of this, just to kind of complete and summarize the conversation from my side, is that when you are thinking of the end goal in mind, the end goal is never something which is directly measurable itself and is rarely materialistic. Because if you think the end goal with association for money, for instance, that I want to make so much money, that is an end goal. You reach that goal and you would want more. You want to make so much fame. You reach that and you want to make more. I want something else in terms of outcome. And I reach that and I want to gather that and then I want again more. So it is endless. But if the purpose is your end goal, the aim at which you are looking at, if it is driven by a purpose, then the end goal is not always measurable. Because just to give an example, is getting freedom for the nation was the goal of Gandhi, but the purpose was through non-violence. And so even after getting the freedom became one chapter in his biography. Unfortunately, he passed away a few months after that. But the purpose is still driven even today in his absence. And the purpose is through non-violence. So then doing a lot of things for the country, for the world, for humanity through non-violence still exists. And therefore that becomes autobiographical in a way. But probably the goals are like chapters if events are pages of a book. That's from my side.
So I will just like to pick up the same lines which you picked and want to complete from my side. And I think when we are creating these stories, ultimately these are just stories. When we are creating memories, these are nothing but stories which we create. It is important to highlight the stories which we want to remember rather than the stories which are more real or more related to truth. Because when we try to find the truth of, say, for example, the same thing which you mentioned about India's freedom, there might be other narrative also that the treasury was empty, the Britishers were already lost in the wars and they had nothing left to, and they were anyways wanting to go. So that can also be a story. It is not about what is truth. It is what inspires us. It is what, because that's why legends are remembered and not just facts. And I think that's a very powerful way to look at it and create those kind of legendary memories in our lives. I think with that we can complete our discussion today.
Thank you so much for listening.